Hi, it's Jeff Carlson with My Resource Library. Today I'm joined by Brian Graham, a product designer from Graham Designs in San Francisco. This podcast for MRL Speaks is sponsored by Decca Furniture. How you doing, Brian?
Great. How you doing,
Great.
Jeff?
And it's Decca Furniture or Decca Contract? I think I may have made a mistake there.
I think I think he'll answer to almost anything as
Yeah.
long as there's a potential order in the place. But yeah, Decca Contract, I think what do you call
Actually, it's funny because somebody else told me that the other day. Listen, you call me whatever you want, just send me orders. I love it.
it?
So, Brian, just give me a little bit of a background. How long have you been designing products? And I'm very familiar. You've designed products for, I know we're talking about Decca, but you've designed a lot of products for Decca Contract. You've designed
Right.
for OFS, for Martin Bratrud. You've got some really fantastic designs out there. But how long
Thank
have
you.
you been doing this?
Well, I have been doing this full time since 1999. Before that, I was an interior designer by training. Worked for Gensler and Associates, and then had my own studio with a partner, John Thiel, in San Francisco for about 6 years. And in 1999, I went off on what I affectionately referred to as my unintentional nonprofit organization.
I know what those are like.
Right.
And you're also joined by your wife, Nancy, works with you, correct? She's in the background. We can see her in the video, but
Absolutely, yes, there
yeah.
she is.
So, and when did she join Graham Designs?
She about 7 years ago.
Okay, good. And so, I just kind of want to jump right in because I want to know
Sure.
this, and
Okay.
I'm hoping that people that are listening to these podcasts want to know this as well. But how do you get your inspiration for design, and what's the process you go through once you kind of get an inspiration for an idea? Like, do you lock yourself in a room for like a month and a half, or like what's that process look like?
That's a great question. So for me, I think a constant source of inspiration is architecture. I had originally wanted as a young boy to be an architect, but somebody told me that there was math that was involved. So it's
Yeah,
like, okay, I can't do that. And I kind of worked my way into sort of interior design and found a program that was taught by architects actually. So it was perfect for me. But I turned out really still always looking at architecture primarily as a source of inspiration, from the larger scale to the minute details and the way things come together. And so that constantly informs what I do. But it also comes from things like I grew up as a competitive dinghy racer, so sailing,
hmm,
uh, yeah, movies, things like that. Probably what a lot of people cite as inspiration.
yeah,
When it comes to a product, I mean, sometimes I'll get a traditional brief that'll come to me and it's like all laid out. Here's what we need to do. And it's very specific and all the constraints are there.
hmm,
And I actually really like that because if I can work with the constraints, then that's where I can find the creativity inside the constraints.
okay,
Oftentimes, though, I'll work with a manufacturer like a Deca in helping to shape where they're planning to go from a product perspective. And at some point, it may seem like the appropriate thing for me to step in and to author something. But more often than not, I think it's just a basic market awareness or market intelligence, if you will, not unlike what you guys do, where you
yep,
really kind of have your fingers on the pulse of what's happening out there and what people are doing, and also from a planning perspective, where things are going.
yeah. So really, the Neocon show in Chicago and some of the bigger trade shows, like I don't know if you go to Orgatech or I don't know if you go to Clerkenwell Design Week, but you draw a lot of inspiration off of kind of what's being thought of and what's being talked about in the industry, correct?
Absolutely. And so, yeah, going to Milan, I've not actually been to Clerkenwell or Orgatech yet.
Okay.
Hopefully, that'll come soon. Uh, but we've been to Milan many times. That's
Yep.
always amazing.
Yep.
But yeah, it's always pretty much focused on Neocon, which I affectionately refer to as the debutante ball, because right, that's when we dress them all up and bring them out, and it's a
Yep.
wonderful time of year because it kind of signals, in some respects, kind of the culmination of a lot of work from a lot of people, the marketing folks, the engineering, product development, everybody that comes into making something. It's fun because I get to stand up and talk to people and claim a lot of credit for it, but it's a team effort.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but
And,
yeah, no, traveling around to the different shows and seeing things is that's yeah,
well,
wonderful.
it's interesting because where you live in San Francisco, and I happen to just from talking to reps in that market and dealers in that market and seeing the manufacturers that they want in their libraries, and it's a little bit different than really like the Midwest and the East Coast, and there is that slide where it does eventually go all the way across the North America, but you're in kind of that, yeah, that spot where it's all boiling and coming to fruition, like residential, residential, or all the frames that kind of started right there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'm a proud Californian, born and raised in LA, but obviously been here for 30 years now in San Francisco. I do. I kind of feel like I have a saying that I think the wind blows from the west to the east.
Yep.
And so I think there is a lot of innovation that's happening here. There's also there's a lot of mistakes that happen that you can see, which is really great because then you learn, right?
Yeah.
And because it's moving so quickly, it's easy to get a sense of what things are like. But what's always interesting, from my perspective at least, is I can understand what's happening here. Part of my job is to translate that to other parts of the country and to other companies that may have a different take on things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So like everybody wants to kind of know how Google's doing something, but they kind of want to know what they can take from it and how they can incorporate it into what they're doing.
Yes.
And so part of what we do here, I think, is to translate what we see, how things are shaped, how applications are driven, but translate it to other companies in other areas.
Yeah. It's kind of a big challenge because it's not one size fits all. So I
No.
imagine that the process that you have to go through and staying within constraints would be extremely important to me because otherwise I'd be down a rabbit hole every 5 seconds. But so I'm assuming that it's the same way for you, that once you get that and you're now in the constraints and you're using your visual cues for kind of the design aspect of it. So then give us a little bit more of what that process looks like.
Okay. Well, everybody's a little bit different. I think the first thing to try to understand, if like I'm starting out with somebody that I've never worked with, a new manufacturing partner, is what do you guys really do well? And then what are the things that you are interested in maybe pushing or maybe you want to learn?
Hmm.
And in some cases, and this has happened more and more, um, a lot of things are being vendored out. So there might be some things that are made in certain areas, but then a lot of the other stuff is coming from a lot of other places.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it
yeah.
used to be the traditional, I'll walk through the factory, I'll see how you do things, and I will design to that factory, have really loosened up a lot. And so now, if we're doing extrusions and we're doing castings and we're doing molding and we're doing other things, those are all going to come from different places.
Okay.
And so part of what I try to do is really get to the essence of what they really want to celebrate in terms of their craft or their upholstery capabilities, or like say in Decca's capabilities for veneers and their artistry with wood. I mean,
Yep.
they can do almost anything when it comes to that. But there are other aspects of it where they need to say, well, we got to push this or we got to try this. And so I'm trying to help them shape that. And most of it comes first through illustrating ideas. And also it's kind of a back and forth, Jeff. It's my symbol for it is an infinity symbol. It's kind of like a read and react. They'll tell me what they're thinking. I'll react to that. I'll show them something. They'll react to it. It'll come back to me. I'll read that. I'll react. So it's a back and forth as we kind
Yep.
of try to find that place and that thing that we want to do together.
Awesome. What's the timeline process? Are you under a constraint there usually as well? I mean, we talked about NeoCon obviously as the big launch date, but you got to have that planned at least 6 months before that. So, is there a timeline that most manufacturers give you? Does John Fishbach from Decca give you a 2-week window, or is it a little bit longer than that?
Well, sometimes maybe just to get the idea going. I mean, oftentimes he will pick up the phone and he'll say, I've been having this conversation now with 3 different design firms, and they keep asking for this. but we don't do that. What do you think? Is that something we should be thinking about doing? And so I'll say, well, I don't know. Let me think about it. So I might just come back and say, I've thought about it. Here's an idea or a sketch of what that maybe looks like for you guys. And they'll say, oh, okay, I think that makes sense. But oftentimes, I would say anywhere from 12 to 18 months is probably on
Okay.
average what you could expect. It depends on the size of the company and it depends on the resources they have. One of the
Yep.
funny things about this great industry, as you know, is it's made up of so many relatively small, very nimble, very agile manufacturers. And they can really almost turn on a dime, right, to be able
Yep.
to do things. But just making one of it is really not the challenge, right? The challenge is, okay, can I now make that 50 times or 100 times? And
Yeah.
that's typically what takes the time to market, is getting all that in place.
Yeah. 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 And that's exactly it. Is you can make it the first time, but then you got to duplicate that quality, the everything exact and mass produce, and that's well, not even mass produce, but at least produce on a
Yeah,
regular schedule. So it's
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah,
Well, you designed a product called Framework for Decca.
I did.
You tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, Framework came, as so many of these efforts with John and Decca Contract, out of our relationship, a 15-year relationship. And so I'd say probably a couple times a year, we sit down and we kind of think about, okay, where do we need to be going from a product perspective? Oftentimes it doesn't involve me. I may be helping them shape something that another designer that they'll work with is going to be working on. But in this particular instance, Framework came out of this idea that I've actually been thinking about for 5 or 6 years, which is, if we're taking executives out of their private offices and we're putting them into the open office, there's got to be something better than just being on a bench for somebody that has a certain amount of decorum or title.
Yep.
So you want them out, you want them open, you want them accessible, but they still maybe want to feel like they've got a little bit more of their space. And so this idea of a kind of a large framed element that would be double-sided. And literally, as I said before, as an interior designer that's morphed into a furniture designer, I look at a floor plan and I see the window wall. And if the private officers are gone, can I take that same syncopated rhythms and create these tall architectural millwork elements that I can pull up to at each side? And that kind of is the shape and the design impetus for Framework.
Interesting. So you really are creating almost a impression of a wall
Yeah.
and an impression of almost a difference of level of team member, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating. And they're really high. They're tall too, correct? They're
Yeah.
what I didn't look at the dimensions, but they're fairly good size.
Yeah, they're like over 90 inches. And
Yeah.
so, but they're designed to be able to, come as individual pieces into an office and then obviously be assembled.
Yep.
In fact, when we first started developing it, and this is the great thing about DECA, is I could draw something and they can say, oh yeah, that's not going to be a problem. And so the drawings that come back to me from my drawings are almost like exactly what I asked for.
Ooh,
to
interesting.
to the point where I got, well, did I really want that? I've learned I have to be very specific about what my intent is, because they really do try to hold that. So what they've been doing though is creating it more like value engineering it to a point now where they've reduced the cost and they've actually made it even simpler in terms of field installation to put this sort of architecturally scaled portal, if you will, that's two-sided into an open space.
Interesting.
Yeah. The thing though that's really interesting to me about you do the one concept is like, okay, that makes sense, and maybe it could be a private office. But then I thought, well, there's other things that are happening. Could it be conference tables? Could it be a video conferencing element? There's all these things that can be sort of framed inside the framework piece that you can, sort of fit in
Yep.
and do. But you still kind of have this more architectural rhythm and syncopation marching across the open space.
I'm not a huge fan of the open office, and
Mm.
I know right now this is actually a really hot topic amongst all furniture folks. But I've never been a fan of it. In fact, typically in my office, which is a house, you would think I don't have acoustic problems, but whenever I get onto a call because of my voice being what it is, I'll all of a sudden hear doors start shutting because I'm too loud. Um, so the open office environment was never suited for somebody like myself.
Hmm.
But I've always thought to myself that I still like spatial division.
Hmm.
And now it sounds like Framework really provided that. And you launched this product. When did this product launch?
The product launched officially last NeoCon.
Last NeoCon.
It did, and but this is the whole thing about furniture and NeoCon. There's the soft launch,
Yeah.
there's the preview,
Yes.
there's the actual launch,
Yeah.
and so those are a little bit nebulous.
Yes. So, but again, in my opinion, you were ahead of a very giant curve that's now hitting our industry, which is going back to, instead of having everybody every 3 feet, now we've got to divide and space out. And this actually fits within the current model very well, actually. It's tall, so it's protected in that visual cues. It's yeah, like everything kind of seems to be like this product was maybe designed for a purpose that may have also been ahead of its time.
Wow, that would be great if I'd love to sit there and say, well, Jeff, our research told us. But it's not the case.
Yeah,
You know what? I think it's just coming back to this idea of architectural ideas of space planning and applications driving furniture solutions,
yep,
and also I think, yeah, if you take things away from people and then you see the bunch of stuff that people have to put in to mitigate the issues that you just took away, it's like something's not right here.
yep.
Maybe we should go back to something not exactly what we had before, something newer, but it's still based on, most buildings are rectilinear, most people kind of respond to that order.
Yep.
And then also the thing too about space, to me in the open office, I mean, is wayfinding,
Yes.
a sense of orientation. Because I
Yep.
think if everything's kind of at one level and it's hard for me to sort of orient myself.
Yes.
And so I kind of feel like these things marching along a window wall or what have you in an open space, to me, they kind of say, okay, that's that area. I kind of
Yep.
understand what that zone is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like a signage that it's pointing it out that that's executive row, or however you want to phrase it. But
Right.
that's pretty much the theory behind it. So it's absolutely gorgeous product.
Thank you.
I do know that it's in Chicago from your couch. It's in their binder inside of my resource library. So the timing was absolutely perfect on doing this call. Before we kind of close up, is there anything else that you would like to kind of share with us about the whole design process, or anything from your perspective that you would like to share?
Yeah, I just think it's, to me, and I've said this before in a couple of different podcasts or webinars over the course of the last couple of months, but I think it's really, really true. What we do, design, is an optimistic act. It's to say, yeah, we think we can make something better, or more accessible or function better. And I really think that in this day and age and moving forward, it's never been more important, I think, for people to have that sense of optimism, and that design can really help craft new solutions that are going to work for people.
That's been the common thread from like a lot of healthcare facilities have
Mm,
believed now that the experience in the hospital matters more than the kind of the layout of the hospital. It's
mm,
if you walk in and it's designed the right way. So design impacts a lot of different things, and furniture design is no different. And we talked a little bit about this. I'm fascinated by what you do, because in my opinion, trying to come up with the inspiration for ideas has just got to be a real challenge, because there is no true innovation in the furniture industry, but it's innovation in a unique way. and it's
Hmm.
kind of fascinating to me. I hope I phrased that the right way, and if not, you
Absolutely.
could feel free to tell me that I'm, full of it. But
No, a lot of it is flavoring, and I'm a big fan of looking back in the past, not only for inspiration architecturally, as we talked about, but also I think about the times like during the war and how much incredible innovation was happening with such limited means by people like the Eames and the Splints and
yep,
Nelson, and just say, that was tough for them back then, and they had their resources and they were really smart and they were really innovative and they created these things that we still to this day say, man, those were fantastic achievements. That's the inspiration now for me to move forward. Yeah. And for everybody, I think, to
yep,
say, yeah, the experience and design really does matter across the spectrum. I mean, it's not just the product or the furniture, it's the quality of the experience, right? It's the
yep.
interaction that you have with people. I just think it's a pretty amazing time.
Yeah, I've always appreciated that when I go to NeoCon and I walk through the Decca Contract showroom on 3 there, it was always a visual experience.
Mm.
It was very fulfilling going through there because of the materials that were used and the products that were there. And you've designed, how many products have you designed for Decca?
Oh, probably I'd say about a half a dozen.
Half a dozen. Yeah,
Yeah, over the span of about 15 years. In fact,
yeah,
it started out as a let's do a product, let's do a discrete case goods product, which I've done a fair amount of those. And you said, well, how are you going to get inspiration for something maybe you've done a lot of?
yeah,
But when I started to understand what their capabilities were, and they could do things that others had sort of value engineered out of their
yep,
process.
yep,
It was almost like, wow, I can go back and do like those millwork details that I used to do when I was a junior designer at Gensler back in the 80s. I can do that again, but I can, do it in a fresh new way. And
yeah,
they were totally embracing of the idea. And so from that perspective and on forward, yeah, they've done some great things and they've got, some roster of really terrific designers. And I think every time the designer comes to Gensler, every
yeah,
time the designer comes to Decca, and they say, well, what's my palette? What can I pull from? It's a pretty rich and deep mix of materials and finishes and capabilities. It's like a wonderful kid in a candy store kind of a thing.
yeah, yeah. Their capabilities are very impressive. There's
Yeah,
no doubt about it. So,
yeah.
well, Brian, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us, for giving us just a little bit of background as to more about how you do things and where framework came from. And Decca is very, very proud of the product. I think it's a wonderful product.
Thank you.
I'm going to have trouble getting executive row out of my head now, but well, we're going to see it. And I may end up using that on some social media post.
That works for me.
But I want to thank you, and it was a pleasure meeting you too. And I definitely appreciate you participating in MRL Speaks.
Absolutely, Jeff. My pleasure. Thank
Thank you.
you.